everybody, my name is Tanya, and today we're going to talk about the 1001 books you must read before you die. So this is a video that I've been meaning to make forever, basically, probably since I started my channel. The fact that I call myself List Obsessed Reader, but haven't really spent much time talking about lists on this channel, is a big downfall, and something that I definitely need to rectify. I've done a list video in the past where I talked about the 30 books you should read before age 30 list that I'm trying to complete at the moment, and I'm making very little progress. And in a couple of months I'll be 29, so I need to speed up the pace a little bit, but I'll leave a link to that video down in the description if you wanted to check out the video I did about that list. But one of the biggest, well, the biggest lists that I'm following, one of the major lists that I'm trying to complete in some way, is the 1001 books you must read before you die list. Now, the 1001 books you must read before you die list has had a number of incarnations and is actually more correctly the 1,305 books you must read before you die now. The first edition came out in 2006, and then there were revisions every 2 years, ending in 2012. So there was a 2008, 2010 and 2012 revision of the list, and with adds and minuses, it now comes to 1,305 books you must read before you die. Between the 2006 and the 2008 list, there was a very substantial revision, and what happened with that one is it made a lot of changes to bring in a lot of books that were published first in languages other than English, and to kind of take it away from the focus on the Western world and broaden the list, which was great. And so it removed like a lot of doubles for a lot of classic authors, and brought in a more international flavour to the list. And so that was 286 changes, I think, between 2006 and 2008. And so that's fantastic, because the point of the list, and such a wide list, is to get you to read widely. And if we're just looking at dead white guys instead of the breadth of what fantastic literature in the world is, then it's not doing a really great job at it. The only small drawback to that is there are some books that are on the list now that haven't yet been published in English. So for myself as an English speaker, and only an English speaker and English reader, I can't speak or read any foreign languages. That means that there are some books on the list that aren't accessible to me at this point in time. Hopefully somebody will decide to translate everything that's on this list, or maybe, one day when I'm really old and have only got a few to go, maybe I'll learn a foreign language. It's probably not going to happen, but that's the trade-off of getting a more international flavour and experiencing more cultures and languages through the list. The trade-off that maybe some of them haven't been translated into English yet is not a big one at all, and I'm very happy with that change. The two subsequent revisions, the one in 2010 and 2012, only made minor changes, so there were only 11 ins and outs on both of those. Basically, they brought in some things that have been published in the last couple of years that they've decided should be added to the list. There hasn't been a revision since 2012, which is very sad. On the one hand, I want another list, I want more lists, and the other side of me says it's big enough already. But it's quite sad that there hasn't been that revision. I live in hope that maybe there'll be another one at some point in time, but I'll just focus on what I've got for now. So that's a little bit of a backstory to the list. I think the editions in North America vary slightly from others. I think maybe they didn't have the 2008, and all those changes happened between 2006 and 2010, but I might be wrong. But I will leave a lot of links down in the description for places that you can find the lists, a lot of good resources. The Goodreads group, there's a Goodreads group focusing on reading books from the list, which is a fantastic resource, one for finding out what's on the list, but also for talking to people about the list. There are many different discussions and threads, and then there are also monthly read-alongs to the books. I haven't been active in that group for a very long time, but I've done some good group reads in there, and as I said, it's a great resource for finding out things, all things list related, so that will be linked down below. I'd highly recommend you check that out. But there are various places around the internet that you can find copies of the lists. There is also an iPhone app, which is a paid app, but that has been produced. And there's also a spreadsheet, which again is a paid spreadsheet that's been developed. I'll have links to those down in the description. I do have both the app and the spreadsheet. I don't actually use the current version of the spreadsheet. There used to be previous versions that you could adapt and modify yourself. That was kind of before the publisher realised that the spreadsheets had been created and they got involved, and now it's a lot more locked down. But I have a developer version of a previous spreadsheet that meant I could make all changes, so I've updated it with the more recent lists, and that's the version I use. Although, that being said, the computer that's on died, and I need to get its hard drive out and get the stuff off, so I don't actually have access to my spreadsheet at the moment, which is quite sad, but I'm doing most of my tracking via the app, which is only available for iOS devices at this point in time, and it is only designed for use with an iPhone, so if you have it on an iPad, it, you know, displays a bit squiggy. But again, links will be down to that in the description, but you don't need to pay to find out what's on the lists. Another good way of finding out what is on the list is to actually buy the books. So these lists are produced and, you know, are actually published in book form. And so this one I have here is the 2006 version of the list. This was the original one, and this is a big list of everything that is on the list. But it's also little essays from the people who selected those books, kind of talking maybe about why they chose it, or a little bit of a review or a description of the book. I haven't read as much of these as I should have. Sometimes they're quite spoilery, so I don't want to read them until I've actually read the book itself, and then you forget to go back and do it. But I have this version of the book, which is, as I said, the 2006 list, but I also have a second one. And so this one I have here is the revised 2012 edition, so I don't own the two in between, but between owning these two, I think I have the essay for all but like 2 or 3 that were added in 2008 and removed in 2010, or the other way around, 10 and 12, so that I don't get an essay on. But if they were that short-lived on the list, I probably don't need to read the thing of it there. So they're a good resource to find out what's on the list and maybe a little bit about why. There's also a lot of pictures and things through here of authors or film adaptations or covers or posters or things, so they're interesting reading in themselves. So when the list first came out in 2006 and I became aware of it, I had not read many things from the list at all. I'm not 100% sure of the count, but I think it was somewhere in the realm of 14 books out of the original 1001, which, you know, is a great start, especially since I was still, how old was I then? 18? But there was a fair way to go. So over the past 10 years now, I've been working on the lists, actively and non-actively, to try and bring my count up, and I've definitely done that. As of today, which is late October in 2016, I've read 282 things from the list, or the combined list, so all 4 versions of that list. I'm not going to run through everything that I've read because we'll be here for hours, but I'm going to leave a link along with everything else that I'll be linking down in the description. I'm going to leave a link to a shelf on my Goodreads that has everything that I've read from the list on there. So if you want to see what I've read, you can go and follow that link and check out the books that I've read from that. But I've definitely brought up my count from the time that I was aware of the list. So if you go through the list and you find that you've not read many, don't worry, you've got plenty of time still. And I'm really enjoying the challenge of trying to read things from the list. This year I've not been particularly good at continuing on. Last year I tried to get to 275 in the list so I could try and get to 300 this year. I fell short of that. I can't remember where I ended the year. I'm now at 282, but again I was hoping to get to 300 by the end of the year. It's late October, so I've got a fair bit of reading for 1,000 books to be done in the end of the year to get to that point, which I don't think is going to happen. But if I can find some small ones, never say die. So I'm going to talk a little bit, you know, why the list. I certainly don't expect necessarily to finish everything on this list. There are some things on here that, you know, maybe I'm not going to be interested in. As with all lists, the selection on it is probably fairly arbitrary and very slated towards the people who are making the selections. What I like about this one is it's a panel, like a large panel of people who have made the selections. It's not just one person, and so you're getting many different perspectives and many different people's views and feelings when it comes to making the list. Do I see it as something that I must read everything from the list whether I want to or not? Well, no, not necessarily. I am setting myself a challenge to try and read as many as I can. The kind of thing in the back of my mind that I'm thinking about given that it's the 1,305 books you must read before you die now, if I can get to 1,001 books from the list of any combination of those 1,305 books, then I will be ecstatic. And that will cover the problem of some books not being available in English to read, or maybe they're old and out of print and you can't get a hold of them, or very obscure. There are some titles that, are basically impossible to find. And so if I was able to read 1,001 books from the, all the incarnations of the list, then I would be thrilled. This is obviously a very long-term project. As I said, I'm zeroing in on a milestone of 300 books on the list. If I can get, a little over 300, then I'll only have 1,000 to go. So that'll be exciting. But it's one of these things that I chip away at. It gets me to read some things that I wouldn't have necessarily picked up otherwise. I'm going to talk a little bit about that a bit later on, some things that I've picked up because of the list that I've really enjoyed, or some things that I picked up because of the list that maybe weren't so great. But on the whole, it's a really interesting selection of items. There's a big focus. The bulk of the stuff, I think, is from the 1900s, but there's some things that go back to ancient times. There's a small pre-1700 section of the list, which has things like Ovid's Metamorphoses and the 1001 Nights and Aesop's Fables and things like that. Then we have sections all the way through 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, the 2000s. And so you're getting a really big breadth of literature that you're reading through for that. And I think that's great for kind of developing your own taste. I know that Michael from Knowledge Lust, hello Michael, who's been wanting me to make this video for a very long time, he used the list as a way of getting into reading, and that he hadn't done a lot of reading, but he's used the list as kind of exploring different genres and finding out what it is that he likes. And I think that's a fantastic use for the list. And it's definitely very true that you're getting a kind of wide education of reading if you're reading from a list like this, and then you can use that to find the areas that you'd like to focus on more. So I love a good list, and when I found this one, I couldn't resist. Yes, it's massive. Yes, maybe I'll never get there, but the joy is in the chase and to opening my mind to new experiences and new books. And with that, I'm going to show you a few things that I've picked up solely because it was on the list that I hadn't really heard of before, and that's the reason that I picked it up and turned out to be something that I absolutely adored. The first one I've got here is something that I hadn't really heard of before I read the list, but picked up because of that, and I just loved it and really need to reread this because it's calling to me now that I've pulled it off the shelf. And that is Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day by Winifred Watson. This is just a cozy, wonderful, heartwarming book about Miss Pettigrew, who's middle-aged and a bit frumpy and out of a job, and she's mistakenly sent to the house of, or the apartment of a young woman, glamorous young woman, who mistakes her for somebody else. She gets swept up into her world and kind of lives for a day. This is told over 24 hours in the life of Miss Pettigrew, and how much her life changes in that day as she's kind of dragged along in the wake of this young glamorous girl. And it's just so lovely, and gives you the warm fuzzies, and was a beautiful, beautiful book that I wouldn't necessarily have heard about prior to the list. Now on BookTube I've heard about it a bit, and being a Persephone book, so I might have come across it, but certainly my first exposure to it is through the list, and for that I am very thankful. Then I've got a couple of books that are actually aimed at children that are on the list. There's a few anomalies in that. There's a few kids books in here. Like I said, Ovid's Metamorphoses is here, so we've got some ancient poetry, but in general it's basically novels, fiction throughout here. There's not non-fiction or the religious texts that you find in quite a lot of top 100 lists. There's no Shakespeare, plays and things are not generally found in here. It's generally adult novels, but here I've got a couple of kids books that I was not familiar with before this and absolutely adored. And that is two books by James Thurber. So we've got The Wonderful O and The 13 Clocks. These were an absolute joy. These were fantastic. So The Wonderful O is a story of a pirate whose mother died in she fell out a porthole, I think, and so he's got a horror of the letter O, and he comes to this village and he decides he's going to take all their O's away and they can't have O anymore. And so it's a great one for wordplay. As you go through the story, the letter O disappears from the text, and it's just, it's so clever and so fun, and I think it would be a great one to introduce to a child. And then the second book by James Thurber I have here is The 13 Clocks, This one I actually listened to an audiobook, which I would highly recommend because the voices and everything was just perfect about it, but I did pick it up in book form here. This one is the story of a wicked duke who is miserable, and he tries to stop time, and his beautiful niece and a hero who wants to marry her, and a quest he has to go on to try and win her hand, and the evils that are thrown in his way. And again, there's a lot of wordplay in this one. It was just a delight from beginning to end, and something completely different that you wouldn't necessarily expect from a literary list, that I wouldn't have discovered without it, and for that I am very thankful. And the last one that I've got here that I first found out about because of the list is a binder, but I'm talking about one in particular, and this is Muriel Spark, and in particular The Driver's Seat by her. There are a number of Muriel Spark novels on the list, which I think I've read them all now, and really much enjoyed them, but The Driver's Seat in particular was something special. Again, I listened to the audio version of this one, which I would highly recommend. It's not a great audio quality, it's quite old, but it's narrated by the wonderful Judi Dench, and she does a fantastic job. It's only 2.5 hours long, and it just captivated me from beginning to end. It's just, this creeping sense of dread through it is wonderful. And so this is the story of a young woman who's kind of stuck at life, and she begins acting strangely. She takes a trip, and I don't even know how to describe this really, but she's kind of spiraling out of control, and the story is shocking, and like I said, there's this kind of inevitable dread through it, that kind of culminates in the climax of the book, and it was wonderful. And yes, Judi Dench made this amazing, and I wouldn't have necessarily found this without the list. Yes, then there have been some duds as such, a couple of things that I've read that I haven't enjoyed, but it hasn't been huge. Pastoralia by George Saunders has the dubious honour of being the first book that I've given 1 star to from the list, although to be fair, I didn't hear about it from the list, it just happened to be on the list, so it's not really the list's fault. And that's a controversial choice. I know George Saunders is very beloved, I just didn't care for that one at all. Another controversial choice that I didn't really enjoy from the list is Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto. I read this one last year, I think, and just didn't connect with it really at all. And something like Peregrine Pickle by Tobias Smollett started off really, really great. This is a book from, I think, the 1700s, and it is a story of Peregrine Pickle and his life, and it starts off really well, and I found it really amusing. And there's this old sea captain character who kind of lives out life like he's still on the water, so he sleeps in a hammock, and there's a scene where he's late for somewhere, and they go off and they try and find him, and he's in a field tacking on a horse, so trying to catch the breeze on the horse. He can't actually ride it, he has to get the wind, and it seems like that were really amusing, but this just kept going on and on and on for too long, and it was very much about Peregrine Pickle trying to get conquests and ruin women, and getting really angry when he's being foiled, and it was just kind of like, no, I don't need that. So that side of things was a bit disappointing. So there's been some hits and misses, some things that I've loved, some things that I haven't cared about so much on the list, but the breadth of choice on there I think is something that's really appealing for this list. For something that I'm really anticipating from the list, a book that I've meant to read for a very long time, and yes, happens to be on the list, is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. This is a chunker, which is probably why I haven't got around to it at this stage yet, but this is one that I'm definitely very much looking forward to reading that is on the list. And as for what I'm reading at the moment, I'm currently listening to an audiobook of a book from the list, and that is The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov, and I am over halfway through this one now. Definitely enjoying it, still have no idea what's going on, but that's the next book from the list that I will complete, which will bring me up to 283 read. So that is a lot of rambling about the 1001 books you must read before you die list. And if you wanted to look through and see how many you've read, make sure to come back and tell me how many from the list you've read, and if you're interested in reading from the list. This video is very long overdue. It's something that I've been meaning to make for a long time, as I've said. I'd like to start a bit of a series talking about different lists, since it is an obsession of mine and the name of my channel. So if there are any lists in particular that you'd like me to take a look at, and maybe I'll go through and tell you which ones I've read from the list and what I think about it, let me know down in the comments if you've got any good suggestions for lists. Ones that are a little bit shorter will be good because I can actually go through each of the books individually instead of something like, something of this magnitude. But any list at all, if there's anything you'd be interested in seeing me look at, let me know down in the comments. If you're also reading from the list, let me know what your favourite book from the list is and which books you're most looking forward to. And for more anticipated ones. If there's anything you know is on the list that I really should get to sooner rather than later, let me know down in the comments as well. As always, thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.